I want to thank everybody for their wonderful, illuminating comments, thought-provoking, and invite from the audience any questions. We are going to arrange for you, anyone who has a question for the panel, to come up and use the microphone that's up here on this pedestal. So rather than trying to take questions from the floor, if you want to come up and ask a question. Anyone? Does anyone have a question? Anyone have a question? No questions?
No questions.
Does no one have a question? Well, the cable's too short, so we have to invite you to come up. Who has a question? I know someone wants to Dan Van Benthuizen, distinguished ex-monitor, journalist, professor, painter. Ooh, that's dangerous. Don't be shy. We want others to come. Dan, nice to see you. Thanks for being bold.
I'm curious as to what you find, you've all had not just distinguished careers as artists, but distinguished careers here at the League as teachers. And I'm curious what individual concept you find most difficult to impart to students.
Just, if you've got a mic nearby, grab it and go for it.
Yeah.
Most of my students are pretty good to begin with.
A difficult
I mean,
concept.
when I looked at the pieces that I picked for the book, they were very accomplished. They'd been people who'd been working for a while. But I find with people who are beginners that the hardest thing for them to understand is that a drawing is a total relationship. People look at my work who I call, you know, the lay person and say, ooh, you're so realistic, it's like a photograph, and then I want to choke them to death because they don't understand how much selectivity goes into making the work. One of the things that's hard for people to understand is what to leave out. But I would say that the thing that's the greatest thing I can give them is that they're not aware that they should think about the whole rather than to start out with some little detail that they think looks good and real. That it's the impact of the whole work. Who was it that said significant form, right? Clive Bell or something said significant form. The whole form is what makes you sense something. There are shitty Renaissance paintings. There are loads of enunciations. And some of them are very boring and mundane because they don't have like the oomph of a good Botticelli. There's something lacking. They just don't have the totality of form. And that's the hardest thing to get across.
I want to just ask, to try to drive the conversation a little bit, anybody hop in here, but what is the first thing you tell students to pay attention to? The first thing they should be paying attention to when they begin working on a drawing?
That very first thing for me is, who are you? How do you see yourself? And as a self, what are you made up of? And what are you doing here? And don't come into this room and leave yourself outside the door. Bring yourself into the studio. Make yourself present. What are your preferences and what are your choices? What are you concerned about? Do you prefer dark lines, light lines, short lines, bright colors, dark colors? Today, existentially and forever. But you can't leave yourself out. And I'm not here to provide you with a sense of self or an underpinning for self. You have to have that before you do anything, or at least try to be willing to show it, no matter what direction the work goes in or the drawing goes in. The size of your hands, whether you're left-handed or right-handed, all of that makes a difference in the way your hand moves and your mind works and your heart works. All of that's involved. And you really have to pay attention to, you also have to listen to yourself as much as you do to anybody else, including the presumed instructor. It's very, very important. I don't think anything is achievable as art in the absence of that.
I'm a student. I walk into the classroom. I've never held a pencil before in my life. There's a naked pose.
No, that was intending something else, but the introduction of, like, say, so I'll give you an example. I was giving a talk in Oregon, and there was some collectors and various, very strange difference of people. There were students, there was some professors, a large group of people. And after a brilliant talk on Matisse, Picasso, and Cézanne, one voice said, "Well, sir, no one knows anything about art. Tolstoy said that art is very subjective." And I had on the lectern something I was going to conclude the talk with, and I said, wait, now suppose I were able to point to art, and I held up the Cézanne boy with a red waistcoat, the one that you saw on the screen. By the way, I didn't know the screen was coinciding with the speaker, so I missed talking about that.
If we could return to that image.
Okay, you could do that.
There we go. Front and center, right?
Yeah, well, this is the Cézanne that I'm talking about, that I held up, boy with red waistcoat. And this is what I held up, and I said, look, this is art. And I pointed to art, and I said, I can talk about it, and I can tell you about each corner and the way the sides hold together, the top and the bottom, and the straights and the curves and the thicks and thins, and what makes art, and why this is about art. So, and I said, who else thought that? Gauguin, Dufy, Léger, Mondrian, Matisse, Picasso, etc. And I said there are 500 museums that have Cézannes in them. So who is it that said you don't know what art is? And I said, this is art, right? And a strange thing happened with the audience. Usually you had a response from the audience. They shunned me. In other words, the game had been shattered, not knowing. So, briefly, the one thing that I tell my students who are drawing, by the way, Matisse said a painting is an expanded drawing. So, but I tell students, beginning students, I go over certain preliminaries and I lay the preliminaries out, and I said the best way to get there is if you did drawings from de Kooning. I forget who he said this to, but de Kooning said to someone, he was quoting Rubens, and Rubens said that you can't ever be able to draw by copying the nude or the, he said, you copy the masters, and when you've accomplished that and know what they're doing, and then you could add your own dimples. And he said, isn't that wonderful, said de Kooning. So I advocate to the class to draw from Ang, and to draw from Holbein, and to draw from Rubens. Just that group. And a guy who fulfilled that completely. And the drawing on the lower left, which is the Ang drawing, is not really an Ang drawing. It was drawn by the student. And if you would stand up for a minute, Ron Nelson. Right. And the first drawing up there is my daughter, many years ago. And that drawing was done based on the whirling square rectangle. You know, there's rebatment, there is the Dutch grid, there are the root rectangles, and there is an astonishing Ramanujan, who was a mathematician who had nested radicals divided by n numbers and pi, which goes into the Cezanne, and see, and then the one on the lower right is also Ron Nelson's drawing, and that's a drawing I did of flowers up in the upper right. And the center is a little girl with a boyish hairdo, right? And in the drawing of that drawing, I'm able to, in other words, to have a perfect pitch as to where each line relates to the corners, the top and the bottom and the sides, and each shape gives birth to the other, like every brushstroke gives birth to the next brushstroke. It's not an idea.
How do you know when a drawing's finished?
What?
How do you know when the nude's ready for dimples? How do you know when a drawing's finished?
The thing tells you. Picasso said, I'm prisoner of my canvas. So the drawing or the thing tells you. I told a student of mine today where there's a nude sitting there and there was a little slip for the vagina. I said, change the slip of the vagina for red. Put a little slash of red in there. He said, you're right. Right? So I looked at the work and it told me, really, it tells you what to do. If method and intellect do not give you a great drawing or a great work of art, right? You live with art, as I said before. You surround yourself with art. You're vaccinated by art. You fall in love with art. You are ravaged by art, and that's what you do. And that's the way you develop it, like a perfect pitch, teach.
Anyone else on the panel care to speak to that? When do we know a drawing is finished?
Well, I was going to get to the previous question on
how do you begin a drawing?
The challenges. The League is a special place. It's a one-of-a-kind place. It's the least academic place imaginable. And the challenges, there are challenges with that. In drawing, people come to class, and people come to my class particularly to want to draw figuratively and realistically. But you come to class, and as you said, it's like you have a nude figure, you know, in a space, and a beginner, it's like, what do you do? How can you do it? Now, I have Studio 1, Studio 2. Studio 1, we do short poses, or the array of short poses. In Studio 2, we do a long, 2-3 week pose. And, well, it was always, for years, it was like, okay, beginner, go to the short side. And that was the thing I was doing. And there was a couple times where I had students who, like, they just sucked at sketching. They just weren't good at sketching, But they given time, they needed to look, needed to ponder, needed to, they were tortoises. And who I thought was a beginner on the short side, they were pretty in the intermediate to late intermediate stage in the longer side. So regardless, I think that the League now has Studio 6 where they're offering beginner drawing classes, and I think that aids people because the thing about the League is not academic, so you don't have a sequential academic structure. You don't have drawing 1, drawing 2. So it is advanced drawing. As Knox said, you draw from transcriptions. It's great to draw from drawings, draw from sculpture. The atelier training, it's solid in that way. But, Anyway, so what I try to do with beginner students is try to jar their convention, you know, and then try to get them to zero in either overall, do the overall gestalt. But the problem with that is that it's hard for a person to navigate long distances from the beginning. They're afraid they're gonna slip and fall. So I try to get them to do the Dickinson, classic Dickinson thing of like zooming in and taking sections. But either way, it's a real challenge teaching beginners in a class with figures in space, you know.
Anyone else have, Bruce?
Yeah, the League forever changed my life as an artist with respect to coming into a class and drawing the nude model for the first time. The first time I walked into the League, I think I was 11 or 12 years of age. There were Saturday classes for children and adults at the same time. I came with a sister who was 3 years older than myself, I awaited and I was advised by a very cultured and artistic father that drawing consisted, a big part of drawing consisted of looking. Well, I had never seen a nude female before, and out came a model by the name of Susie. I don't know if you remember Susie. Susie was a 400-pound lady who talked to herself. And she sat up on the model stand in all of her magnificence, and she talked about her romances with Hitler and Mussolini, and she went on, and there were those kids sitting out there, and we were told, you're doing contour drawing now, and you should have a sharp pencil and put your pencil point on Susie. Well, that you know, it was an 18 by 24 piece of paper. Susie was magnificent. We got about halfway through the, I don't know, it was 2.5 or 3 hours, and Alice Harold Murphy, who was the children and adult instructor at the time, I never subsequently found out who was Alice Harold Murphy, but she was fantastic. I really wasn't getting much work done. I was really looking, and there was a lot to look at. And the Alice Harold Murphy went over and got a hold of my sister and took her out of the room. And I didn't know what was going on. She was talking with my sister Joan. And then at a certain point, not long after that, my sister came and got me and said, "We're on our way home." And I didn't know what had happened, except that I had some lines that I had drawn on the paper, and this first experience at the Art Students League was absolutely amazing. What was recommended to me by my League instructor through my sister, and then conveyed through my parents, was that I was staring so much that I really should be checked for glasses. And I really owe the League.
Are there any more questions from the floor? Please come up and
Can I just speak loudly?
yes, you may.
That's kind of so a lot of people spoke about your daily practice of drawing. So I understand you make a confession. This is the worst place to make this confession. But I don't draw every day. That's something I want to do, but I struggle with it without the structure of the class. So my question is, am I hopeless? Is it an innate impulse that either you have this impulse to draw every day, like you have the impulse to draw your child in the crib every day, or is it something that can be developed? Is it a discipline that can be actually developed?
Frank, why don't you take this?
No, I'll give it to Knox.
About finds his own way to be an artist.
He got it.
The more you draw, the better you get.
Is that over? Okay. You know, it's, you draw out of the love, and I'm talking about a profound perception. A very interesting thing happened in class. We had a full class and a bunch of people were drawing, and I thought of something, and I said, "Look, I want everyone here in class to draw one another. And all of a sudden they begin to pair, oh, I know who I want to draw, I know who I said, no, you don't. And I got a bag, and I got names in the bag, and you reached in and pulled out a name in the bag, and that's the person you were going to draw. Wow. The question was in their face, well, I don't want to draw that person. They sat down, and I said, now, pretend this is the first and last drawing you'll ever do, and then we'll discuss it. So they sat down and began to draw, and everyone broke through. There was no exception. They broke through in a major way, and we talked about it. And the idea is they put their money on the line, so to speak, and they went all out in the drawing. And I said, this demonstrates to you that you are an artist. You don't become an artist. So by dint of drawing this and that, you will get better. Give me a break. You might do something different, right? But if you're an artist, that's what you do. So out of the love of art and being in art, you can draw, in other words, talking about drawing, why you draw every day or what have you. I mean, I draw every day, and I paint every day, and my days are filled with that. And also the looking and the study of it. I used to go as a student to the museum, come back to the League and talk to my instructor about it, and it didn't dawn me that they didn't know, right? They did not know. And I thought I was wrong. Okay.
I would say one thing, if you're drawing doubt, doodle. Doodle, that's what you want to do as much as possible. So the question is, a doodle a drawing? Huh?
Sig, would you like to?
Can be. It can be.
There's 1,000 ways to draw, there's thousands and thousands of people who do draw. I mean, my whole, he says doodle, and I don't really believe he means it, but at any rate, because, I mean, Rico Lebrun, who was a great draftsman, said that people who don't have anything to say gossip, and people who can't draw sketch. Because a sketch is one step up from a doodle. I mean, I would like to think, because I'm trying to be on that edge, that the mark I'm making is about as precise as a scalpel making a cut in a brain. That it's that clear, and that's what Ang could do, but with such fluidity that it was unbelievable. Okay, and then there's this whole sense of innocence, because when I was at the Art Students League, they said there's this great Ang show at the Met. I didn't know how to pronounce that name. I knew those drawings, but I thought it was Ingres, so I didn't go see that show. I thought it was some Chinese guy they were talking about.
Thank you, Sig. I'd like to thank all of our speakers. It's been a great honor to have you here tonight, and I'd like to invite everybody to stick around for refreshments. The store is open. The books are for sale in the store, and you may continue you may continue your discussions with our distinguished panelists during the reception. Thank you all for coming.